Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar we have this afternoon on digital asset security, the problem you do not know you have. My name is David McCann, and I'm the CEO of ARC Orient Pacific. We have a simple webinar talking about the problem of digital asset security. A lot of us, it's a problem that we actually don't really know we have. We've got an esteemed panel, a panel I've had the joy of being in business with before. They come from the payments industry. I won't go through them all and their accolades individually, other than Philip Meyer, Keith Coury, Gideon Malham, and James Flick. Philip, Keith, and Gideon and James are all co-founders of Vaultovo, a biodigital security custodian solution. Now, what we'll do is at the end of it, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So if you'd like to ask questions beforehand, please use the Q&A function or the chat function, and we'll come back to you. Gentlemen, good afternoon. How are you guys?
Good, thanks, David. Thanks.
Good.
Very good.
Excellent. Okay, so today is Freedom Day. And I was just wondering, is this the irony of digital assets, that it puts us all into an element of distrust? And we go back to where it all began in the DeFi centralized market. And I guess, what happens, mate? Philip, and you, if I can learn you, what happens in particular? We've got all these hacks, all these thefts. What do you think the future of digital assets is gonna look like? Not just the cryptos, but also the real world assets.
I mean, without a doubt, fraud will increase. The thing that happens when the dollar starts weakening, it's my personal opinion, is that people will put more money into digital assets, and we also know that the real world asset tokenization is going to grow extensively. So the bigger the stash, the more the chances for bad actors would be to try and get part of that stash. So my personal opinion is that the fraud will definitely increase because of just this very simple tariff increase. And I mean, over the recent months, we have seen an unprecedented increase in the theft of digital assets. Last year was the worst on record, when crypto thefts with hackers stealing more than 2.2 billion in 2024 alone, and that was an increase of more than 21% on the previous year, 2023. One single Korean link group, Lazarus, and I think everyone knows that in the audience, was responsible for an estimated 1.7 billion of that 2.2 billion. And they used the funds to fund illicit programs, and it shattered records for cybercrime. Now, as a side note, Bybit, the exchange that lost the funds, is totally unscathed and managed to replenish their reserves, and they currently merrily keep on trading as if nothing has happened, although 1.7 billion of their stash was stolen. Now, in comparison, 30 years ago, a rogue trader lost Barings Bank $1.3 billion. Barings Bank went bankrupt, and ING bought it for £1. Another interesting snippet, and this is, if we look at the biggest cash heist in history, was the so-called Tonbridge heist, when in March 2023, $1 billion of cash was stolen from the Central Bank of Iraq shortly after the US began the invasion. So, I mean, there's no doubt that in the crypto world, there's a lot more stealing and hacking going on than anywhere else, and in the cash world or in the banking world ever was. Now, crypto scammers are preying on trust at an alarming scale. Americans lost 5.6 billion in cryptocurrency fraud in 2023, a 45% jump from the year before. Such exploits bypass traditional safeguards by targeting human behavior and transaction signing in real time. It seems like every innovation in digital assets seems to invite an innovation in crime. This brings us to a paradox, which is at the heart of crypto infrastructure, which we as Vaultovo we're in. It's called the custody laundering paradox. We've built a financial system on transparent blockchains, yet the criminals are exploiting these weaknesses to hide their tracks. The more we fortify custody of assets with new tech, the more it seems that the bad actors probe the surroundings to launder funds and evade detection. It's ironic that a technology that's heralded for transparency can be bent towards anonymity in the wrong hands. The problem we don't know we have is that these threats are accelerating and shapeshifting beneath the surface. For many institutions and investors, it's easy to focus on the familiar risks, things like lost private keys, volatile markets, and the like, while missing the next generation of threats: state-sponsored hacking syndicates, quantum computing, breaking our encryption, fake identities that's bypassing the KYC checks, and then last but not least, the regulatory blind spots that seem to turn into gateways for fraud. Now, we're here today to shine a light on those unseen vulnerabilities. Our discussion will explore the cutting edge of security threats in the digital asset world, the ones that aren't yet broadly recognized, and what we can do now to get ahead of them before they inflict the next billion-dollar damage. Thank you, David.
Philip, just on that, can you just quote that again? So the fraud that brought Lehman's down was how much?
The $1.3 billion. It was actually 880 something million pounds, but if you convert it to dollars, $1.3 billion.
So that collapsed the bank, whereas Bybit lost 1.7 billion and just carried on regardless.
Correct, and no one seemed to get to bite. It just goes on. The world goes on.
Kind of reminds me of that kids movie Madagascar, Smile and Wave. Okay. I mean,
an operational expense.
you also mentioned ID fraud as well, and I guess, having worked with you in the payments industry in the past, we've both seen a lot of various fraud in the payment sector and the FI sector. I mean, what are you thinking now? What do you see the future challenges now with security compared to before in the whole digital asset age?
Well, I mean, we did traditional payment security, you must remember, evolved over decades. And there were clear regulatory frameworks. Banks has been around many, many years. I mean, from the days when the people were putting gold in the Wild West days. The digital asset compressed the evolution within years. And there were initially very, very little oversight. I mean, things are happening now on a regulatory space as we see, but when this whole thing began, it was like the Wild West, and there was no regulation. Everyone could buy and sell. There was no identity checks or KYC checks and the like. Now, in the early 2000s, the company that I founded, we witnessed similar growing pains when the online payment industry first scaled globally. But the key differentiation between digital assets and the financial banking environment and credit cards is centralization. When a major card network was breached in 2008, I recall that as if it was yesterday, they contained the damage because of the architecture. Now, in contrast, last year, Crypto.com experienced explosive growth of more than 970% in trading volume, while simultaneously suffering multiple security breaches because their centralized custody model created and still does a central point of failure. The core lessons we haven't applied is separation of powers. In traditional banking, they separate the control mechanism. There's no single entity that can authorize high-value transactions without multiple authentication layers. In crypto, exchanges function as a broker, as a custodian, as a clearinghouse simultaneously, which, as we all know, creates systemic risk. This reminds me of a situation back in 2012 when a payment processor I worked with was experiencing breach. And don't get me wrong, in the financial systems, there are breaches and things go wrong. It's not that it never goes wrong. So the hackers did gain access to the system, but they couldn't move any funds because the physical HSMs which is a hardware security module, requires biometric verification from multiple officers. The principle of physical separation with biometric verification is incredibly important in the custody of digital assets, and it's precisely what we've incorporated in our custody solution, Voltavo.
Okay,
Thanks, Dave.
So basically, what we're saying here, it's a combination of old school technology and also some new technology. I mean, Gideon, if I put it over to you, what I'm feeling is a bit of a tension in the market dynamics between security and innovation, which is not ironic when you consider that early use of the dark web and crypto was to buy drugs and arms. So I guess what are you seeing in today's market, Gideon?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think you're spot on. The tension between security and innovation in a market that's where we're going, $10 trillion just in the tokenization market for the next few years, will only exemplify that. There are multiple players, it's all innovation driven, and then on the back end, we have a global financial infrastructure that's just not designed to cope with that deepening democracy and multiple players in it. The scale is overwhelming, and also the sensitivity and dynamics. You know, if you look at the financial institutions that want to enter the space, they obviously bring strong historical compliance cultures, but you could kind of sense that they're outdated with their security models. We've done some analysis that shows that about 90% of the banks entering the digital asset space are relying on AI-driven fraud detection systems, of course, designed for what Philip referred to as credit card fraud, and it's not kind of compatible with where the digital asset fraud is going. So I think there's a strategic shift that's required. I mean, if you think about it, the banks need to move away from that reactive detection to a proactive prevention structure. And that's both architectural and culture. That's not the one or the other, it's both. Our work with Hong Kong banks is a good example in the CBDC space. They kind of are working in this space. They're trying to get to this proactive play. What I love about them is they do it primarily as a competitive differentiator. Okay. And that's a big deal. So if you think where kind of the game is going, Voltavo is one of the players there. It's bridging this gap between a traditional, well-entrenched, mature security model and then this radical innovation that the market is bringing. And by the way, your kind of whole tariff American play is going to stimulate this even more. The banks need to address the prevention challenge using hardware separation and biometrics. And this then enables the banks, if you think about it, that's a back office activity. This enables the banks then to apply better innovation strategies in capturing market and developing their UXs on the front end.
Gideon, if I can interrupt there, one of the things I want to bring it back to, you just mentioned there is with the tariffs. Are you saying that there's going to be more and more interaction and transactions between digital assets as they move away from the US dollar? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think it's a simple economic model. What you've done, or what the US has done now, is implemented another layer of restrictions on the global trade. And regardless of what trauma this planet has gone through, there are always people that make it work. So you've restricted general common global trade, and that's all going to drop itself down into tokenization and digital world to continue with the trade. Not going to stop.
Okay, so then Keith, if I hand it over to you as the CDO, I mean, you've seen all the various different security. I mean, where are we at now? So what are the flaws, I guess, and what are the opportunities from what you've seen? Keith? We lost Keith.
No, it's just on mute.
I guess that's the first flaw of technology, is on mute. Keith, what now? Philip, do you want to?
No,
hello, David.
There you go, Keith. First flaw of technology, you're on mute. You're supposed to be the CTO, my friend.
Being polite to keep quiet for others, right? Meeting etiquette. Anyway, thanks, David. Yeah, so when it comes to current flaws, etc., the core flaws that I see stem from 3 architectural vulnerabilities that we see in current systems. The first vulnerability is centralized key management. This creates a single point of failure, even with multi-signature approaches, as the underlying seeds, private keys, or master keys are often still stored in central systems. The second vulnerability I see is pooling of assets into a single wallet. Whether this is a warm or cold wallet, this creates a large attack surface that actually entices hackers to try and compromise them, because their time and effort and resources could result in huge payouts, as we actually recently saw in the 1 billion plus hack of Bybit. And then the third and final vulnerability I see is identity authentication and verification, because this often remains fundamentally detached from transaction authorization. The Axie Infinity hack demonstrates this perfectly. $620 million stolen, not because their cold storage was breached directly, but because the authentication and verification mechanisms controlling access to this was compromised. You see, with Voltavo, with decentralized key management, segregation of assets and wallets, and biometric identity authentication and verification, I see these vulnerabilities actually mitigated.
Keith, are you saying this can also apply for IDs? So, you know, we want to open a bank account now, and you basically, like I opened a bank account the other day, and I had to give my passport to the bank for 2 days. I mean, you saying we can, and I know that's how a lot of identity theft starts. So, are you saying that we can now get to control your own ID and know where it's gone and where it's not gone to by having all this?
Yes, definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, digital IDs is also just viewed as an asset or a token. And biometrics is reliant on it. So yes, definitely, if you've got a mechanism to store your digital ID in a secure way with biometrics attached that only gives you access to it, yes, it's definitely usable by banks and other government organizations for that matter.
All right. And then, so like quantum computing. So is that, you know, I've had somebody tell me yesterday that their custodian solution is quantum safe. And I suspect that's because quantum computing hasn't got to where it needs to be. I mean, what's your thought on the future of cryptology in the quantum computing space?
Yeah, my thoughts on quantum computing is that it definitely poses a real but future threat.
Okay.
You know, blockchain technology in its current form is not quantum safe. Most and existing blockchains, including Bitcoin for that matter, rely on asymmetric cryptography that could be vulnerable to quantum computing attacks. However, I must say that the blockchain technology can be adapted to resist these quantum threats and attacks by adopting new post-quantum cryptography algorithms and protocols. Okay. So the immediate risk is low because the current limitations of quantum computing are not quite there yet. And the blockchain industry is aware of these risks and are actively working on the solutions to ensure long-term security in the quantum era when we get there. So Voltavo software is easily upgradable to adapt to these new post-quantum cryptography algorithms and protocols once the NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the blockchain industry actually adopt them.
But what I'm seeing, or what I'm hearing is, so we're leaving ourselves open for a big, the greatest train heist, I suppose, with both pooled assets and ID and what have you.
Correct.
So James, you're out in the market. I mean, when I speak to the exchanges, and I've spoken to a few, a big issue for them is really, it's like a land grab for customers. Seems to be two things. One is they want to issue more wallets, and the second thing is they want to be considered to be an FI. I mean, what are you seeing out there in relation to the security?
Yeah, I mean, well, the from speaking to the market, and we've had a lot of conversations over the last 2.5 years and got quite detailed with a good number of these as well. I mean, there are some core challenges out there that we see almost at least 2 of these at any given industry business that we speak to, and in a lot of cases it's all 3. The first one really is the cost of providing custody or self-custody. That's there's a very difficult choice that a lot of businesses that are in the blockchain space have to make, is either build or license expensive in-house custody infrastructure, or pay a pretty significant fee to a third-party custodian. And we have, a mid-sized crypto exchange who we're working with, who they themselves spend 2 million a year annually on a custodian, on a third-party custodian, and that is around 15% of their operating expenses. Now, put that into like the example of a medium-sized company or a small company, that cost is prohibitive to a lot of them. It's quite funny with the Bybit point that they've lost $1.7 billion and they're still trundling along, but really that 1.7 billion is an operational expense as well. So the costs are a big factor of what people are doing and how they're doing it. The second is there's a big regulatory challenge at the moment. I think by nature, the businesses that are operating in blockchain-led businesses tend to be global, or at least across many countries, and each territory at the moment does have different regulatory landscapes. So we have one platform we're working with. They operate in 30 countries, and it's really a patchwork of regulations they're dealing with. And one of their executives was pretty honest with me and said that we have 3 people in the business who it's their only job is to track the regulatory landscape changes that are happening across the markets. So that's both that also adds to a cost, because you've got to put specific resource towards these things as well. But yeah, that's a real head scratcher for them. But I think the biggest and most common challenge we see is around the lack of flexibility that exists in solutions at the moment. Businesses really are forced into these two or into 3 choices, really. Either become a regulated custodian, use a third-party custodian, or avoid it altogether. And sadly, we are seeing a lot, leaving custody entirely to their clients, which is removing a huge critical service component.
James, can I interrupt? How can, when you start digitizing real-world assets, how can you avoid it altogether? How can you avoid the custody solution altogether?
How can you avoid the custody solution altogether?
Like, it's not like if you're digitizing real-world assets, your title deeds, your shares. I mean, you just can't avoid it. You have to have a custody solution for that.
You can leave it up to the responsibility of the clients and the people that you're dealing with. Let them do self-custody, which is what it happens in some cases. Acting as a custodian, yes, then you have your own robust set of infrastructure that you're operating, whether you've built it or you're licensing it.
Okay. All right. So basically, what I'm hearing from you is there's three challenges that customers are facing. One is it's a cost to provide the right level of security and custodian solutions. The second is each jurisdiction has different regulatory changes, and we saw that with Hong Kong and the number of percentage of cold storage versus warm storage. And then for some people, it's just too hard. And I told you guys the story of one of the family offices I know where the second or third generation, and I think once a month, he sends the PDFs of his Coinbase statements to his custodian just to show proof that he has it in case he's hacked. So I get that. I get that. I guess like this has been quite interesting. I mean, what I still feel is that there's really no solution out there, that people are still unaware. I mean, there are solutions, but I listened to a very interesting chat between 2 custodian solutions, and one is all about self-custody and DeFi, and the other is all about pooled resources. But as you guys have said, pooled resources generally leads to fraud. Gideon, what would you say are the key sort of takeaways in relation to how we can better manage our digital assets in the future and ensure that there's better security, I guess?
Yeah, I think the cause of cultural difference is like traditional financial institutions. So the big players, as the market matures, need to move from that kind of reactive detection play for more to proactive positioning. We have to position this as a deeply secure international facility or platform. So that's the first most important. The second one, I think, which is really the dilemma most people face, is the solutions has to work within a user experience. You can't complicate the user experience. I mean, just think about the difference between managing your own seed phrases and a biometric fingerprint. It has to go to a simple, easy to use UX on the one side, but that end user must also, through that experience, develop confidence both in the brand, the company they're working with, and in the fact that they're in control of it. But there's a nuance there, and if you reflect on it, you can see that pretty clearly. Is my security system has to be easy in the interface, and it has to give the end user confidence. You can't have somebody doubting or feeling insecure in playing with this, which is what we have on both sides with the too easy phone access, or the other side is this massive complicated seed phrase management. And the last one is this explosive growth we've talked about. And I think it's going to get further stimulated over the next year. Is, you know, the exchanges, tokenization platforms, banks, gaming companies, all of them need to migrate their back office infrastructure and their architecture from these kind of bolt-on multiple security plays to being really part of the foundational infrastructure of all of these platforms.
Okay. So essentially what you're saying is that in the end, we're just going to control our own destiny of what, you know, we're going to have our own solution of how we look after our digital assets. And then we're going to control our own destiny, whether it's pooled, whether it's self-storage, or whether it's central key. It's the only way forward.
But the interesting thing, Dave, is you probably have to have the end user being an active participant in the authentication play. You know, it's like whether you go through security to show your password at customs, it's at the end of the day a biometric or some direct reference with the individual. We have to pool stuff because that's how you leverage it. We have multiple players in the infrastructure, and at the end of the day, each agency that plays in this world must be able to authenticate themselves, and biometrics play a big role in that space.
Okay, beautiful. All right, I've got a couple of questions that have come in from the floor, if I can. One question says, which is the easiest solution to interact with the existing FIs and with fiat? What's the best way to do that? I'll throw that at you, Philip, I guess.
Just repeat, please. I didn't.
The question is what would you recommend as the most secure solution to interact with existing FIs and our fiat?
The most secure solution to interact with your bank.
Yeah, I guess that's it. The FI.
Effectively.
Yeah.
Probably the most secure is to go to the teller and get cash from them, you know, but because then there's no computers involved. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, if you've got an Android phone, you use face recognition, you're probably prone to hacking even in the banking system, because we know how bad the Android side on biometrics is. Same probably go for the mobile phone. There's some people here in Hong Kong that, and I haven't seen it with my own eyes, were able to recreate the HSBC PIN that you get to put into your computer. So you know, even financial systems, banks are prone to hacking using computers, and we've seen that before. So yeah, I mean, tongue in cheek, probably the safest way is to go and get your cash at the teller of the bank. That would be the safest way. Then you wouldn't have to interact with computers and mobile phones to do transfers. But there is problems even in the normal financial space.
Okay. I've got one other question, which comes. It says, in relation to, with the advent of AI, is there actually a solution over voice recognition? Because Gideon said that you need to have interaction from the end user. Is voice recognition interaction?
I don't think so. I think that it's possible, it's better, but again, with AI, the sophisticated AI can simulate as fast as I develop protocols to detect authenticity. It simulates it and plays in. I think that for me, the core solution in this whole game is separate hardware gateway with biometrics, So whether you're using eyes or fingerprint or pulse, but there's the individual needs to be identified, and the hardware cannot be integrated in the same system that our phones and laptops or computers are in. So it's a separate identity play that resides in separate hardware, whether it's a button or a device or a card or anything.
Another question.
David, if I can maybe just interject here. Now, I'm not going to tell you I'm 100% sure about this, but HSBC users will remember that if you called in for telephone banking, you could say a phrase and then they would log on.
Yeah.
I think HSBC stopped that completely. And the only reason why they would have stopped that is what Gideon says. AI can mimic your voice now. And so anybody can use AI and then access my bank account using my so-called voice biometrics.
I've got another question, which is a comment that says, are you able to comment on the current regulatory structures in Hong Kong around digital assets custodian?
Well, as far as I know, that there is not yet a regulation around being a custodian. There is regulation around being an exchange and how you should custody the customers' digital assets. But there is no, as far as I know, you can't get a license yet in Hong Kong to become a custodian. Like someone like Extras, for instance, are licensed out of Singapore and Dubai. But you can get a license to be an exchange. And in the exchange license, there is very strict regulations around the custody. I do not think they prescribe the technology you have to use. I think they did try, but it didn't work. They do prescribe the percentage that needs to be in cold storage. And I know that they are reviewing that because the percentage was impossible to reach. So I think it was 95%. But the physical custody, as far as I know, is not yet regulated in detail in Hong Kong.
Okay. All right. Any other questions there? No, that looks like that wraps it up. Guys, I think that was a really interesting discussion. It sounds to me like there's a lot of evolution to go in the industry, and that we'll be waking up to further headlines as we continue digitizing the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Dave.
Dave.
Thanks, guys.
Everybody, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.